For this assignment, we are discussing the CIA's involvement in drugs and weapon trade with Nicaragua after the Boland Amendment was passed in 1983. We're supposed to take the lens of lawyers, so that's what we're going to be doing. I believe that they are guilty. I'm just going to start off by saying that the CIA and the U.S. government are highly guilty of breaking these laws. And kind of much more than that. They're low-key traitors to their own country in a way. Maybe if that's crazy to say, but not really, since they funneled crack into the United States. But I digress. Let's just hop on in. So, starting with one of the first topics we discussed or researched, it was a document that contained illustrations. So it contained information that told us that in the past, in the 1980s, there was this project called Project Democracy that was funded by the U.S. government, and they would supply money, guns, and just anything they can use to support the Somoza regime, which was a predominantly Spanish regime of power. They were authoritarian in Nicaragua. And what they would do, what Project Democracy did, in one of these cases, was they flew and dropped these manuals or pamphlets containing a bunch of images of propaganda, which kind of contained like instructions on how citizens can, I guess, sabotage their own country and the Sandinista-led government. In it like had this message saying that true Nicaraguans would, who love their country and cherish their freedom, would act out these various actions depicted inside of the manual. And often they were like, stop going to work, stop paying taxes, stop doing whatever, right? Stop making the country turn around, move. I guess, to stop the movement of the Sandinistas. And that was a group of people who kind of went against the Somoza the Somoza regime and gained independence, because originally they were controlled by Spain, only to still be under control of the Spanish through the Somoza regime. And so to kind of gain more freedom for actual true Nicaraguans, the Sandinistas were founded, I guess. They came to be, and they took over the government. Like they should have. They're the good guys in this story. But instead, the CIA and the Somoza people, they came together, joined powers, and tried to throw the Sandinista government.
I agree with Dylan's side that the CIA is a corrupt government, and I have my evidence. Starting with Source 1, Document 2. In 2002, a Bay Area drug ring was sold tons of cocaine to the Crips and the Blood. Those are two of the famous street gangs that we now know today of Reds and Blues. This drug ring was located in Los Angeles in 2002 that has funneled millions of drug profits to a Latin American guerrilla army run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Agency. A news report from a Mercury News investigation has been found. It has surely been one of the bizarre alliances in modern history. The union of the U.S.-backed army attempted to overthrow a revolutionary specialist government Uzi-toting gangstas of Compton and South Central Los Angeles. The Dark Alliance was about them. The three cocaine traffickers who supplied the South Central market was literally tons of pure cocaine from the 1980s to 1990s. So this goes to show that that this was run by the U.S. Central Intelligence Army. And this shows how corrupt and out of place they are, instead of just helping us out and just being the US and be oh hey, we're the government and we're here to give you these laws. And let's hope we don't find any of these cracks that we have in our strong protective armor. And I have more proof. Document 6. If you read this speech from President Ronald Reagan to the nation, He spoke to the nation from the Oval Office on August 12, 1987, about the Iran-Contra scandal and his administration's future plans. In his speech, he emphasized the importance of bipartisan foreign policy and reviewed the lessons learned from the Iran-Contra hearings. Thank you. And reaffirmed his commitment to aiding the Nicaragua Contras. He also laid out his goals for the rest of the term. It means that not only did Ronald Reagan had a scandal, we learned that he supported the Nicaragua Contras with his commitment in supporting them. He claims that his commitment regime in Nicaragua.
Ooh. He'll return. Why am I saying this, bro? This is gonna get cut.
Sorry about that.
You chilling? We good.
Yeah, my phone is tripping out. He claims respect, and put this in quotation marks, respect the Nicaraguan people's basic rights of free speech, free press, free elections, religious art, library. So we now learned that President Ronald Reagan actually supported the Nicaragua Contras with his commitment, and also supported them. And he kept this as a secret, and he claimed that his commitment was to help Nicaragua in 1979. But if we go back to 1987, it goes to show that he actually kept this for us a long time before he actually, spilled the beans and actually told us what was going on. So nobody knew what we were doing. So he just kept that as a secret.
Kept it under wraps for a very, very long time, as they usually do. There's actually, in document 4, they kind of go over it. There was a note between Oliver North and John Poindexter, goofy name. He was the National Security Advisor for the United States. Oliver North was a high-ranking United States National Security Council member. He participated in the sale of weapons to Iran after a law had passed preventing such sales. So, very deep-rooted corruption within the country, but that's expected. It's America. Most people know this by now if you pay any sort of attention to history, but, it's not the case nowadays, I guess. Look at where we are as a country. But let me get back to it. In 1986, these transactions were made public, but guess what? He was dismissed by Ronald Reagan, because why not? He was also granted immunity to prosecution in exchange for testifying in front of Congress about the scheme. So simply just by spilling the beans in front of a court, he was dismissed and cleared of the charges, and made it so he wasn't able to get prosecuted. What? Okay. But yeah, the document further goes into detail about Manuel Noriega and his involvement in the U.S. drug trade. So, it says that Noriega, I'm probably butchering that so bad, and North had told Oliver North that Panama, would be willing to accept narcos, which are like drug dealers, in exchange for the U.S. helping him clear his name and image, and promised to lift the U.S. ban on arms sales for the Panamanian defense government. And that if this would happen, then he would take care of the Sandinista leadership for the U.S. So they were getting Panama involved within the Spain, U.S., and Nicaragua conflict. It tells us a little bit more about who Noriega is. He had previously helped an operation resulting in an arsenal explosion and fire in Managua. The U.S. then talks about how they were considering the offer because they were certain that Noriega was definitely the guy for it. I should have just ran with Manuel the entire time. I don't know why I used his last name. But, they were certain that he was able to hold his end of the deal because, he was an established, drug lord of sorts, warlord. And they honestly didn't even care about that because they had one enemy in mind, and that was Nicaragua for some reason. I actually don't know too much about why. That's the question of the decade or century, I should say. Yeah, but Document 8 goes more into kind of what was going on. Uh, the Democratic of Nicaragua, a U.S.-funded fighting group that was used to throw the Sandinista government in Nicaragua. So they were basically freedom fighters on the sake, or for the sake of the U.S., fighting the Sandinista government, which were for the Nicaraguan people, trying to uphold their rights and keep them like not authoritarian and all that stuff. So bad guys. They came out to dispute some of the statements made by some members, Arturo Cruz, Adolfo Calero, and Alfonso Robelo Calles. He goes on to say more that the claim of the Contras are not and will never be an instrument of a foreign power is a laughable and untrue statement. Because it is. The Contras is another word for the group of freedom fighters in Nicaragua. So for people to go and say that they are not and will never be an instrument of foreign power, which is what the U.S. government claimed, he's saying it's laughable and untrue, since he was. He goes on to say that when he joined the FDN, another group, the Fuerza Democratic of Nicaragua, it's the abbreviation for it, of course, acronym, whatever it is. He says that when he joined it in 1981, he had hoped that it would be controlled by Nicaraguans to carry out their objectives that they had decided collectively, but rather he discovered that the Contras, the group that he had joined, were actually a proxy army controlled by the United States government. So no matter what side you were fighting for in Nicaragua at the time, you ended up still serving the U.S. because the so-called freedom fighters were not freedom fighters. You were fighting for the wrong cause. So it was really hard unless you wanted to actively go and search for the Sandinista government and become a part of that to do anything and to fight for your rights as citizens. And you were persecuted if you did such by the Somoza regime, since they held a lot of power, and it was the Somozas that were still reigning in power when all these wars were happening. It just really goes to show that the U.S. government is very corrupt and very, very involved in these wars. We also learn a little bit about Freeway Rick Ross in some other documents. I don't have notes on it, but I know this off the top of my head, and he is he is largely responsible for the crack epidemic in the 80s, which was also funded by the U.S. government, the CIA, because of their involvement in the narcos, as we had previously mentioned. They do a lot of things for money and for power and control. The reason why we have kind of such wide spread bases everywhere is because we hold power in those locations, and we did not gain those through, justified and moral ways. Definitely not. Far from it. I know you got more, so go ahead. Further prove that the U.S. is highly guilty, like we all know.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to show you my best.
You got it.
For my last document, we have document number 9. On Sunday, October 5th, 1986, we don't know the time exactly, a young Sandinisian soldier by the name of Jose Fernando Cañas. I hope my Spanish works.
Ooh, I like that. Fernando.
Ooh. Anyway, he sighted a cargo plane in the Nicaraguan airspace near the Costa Rican border. He fired a Russian-made missile and brought down the plane. 3 crew members, William J. Cooper, Wallace Buzz Sawyer, and radio operator Freddie Vilches, were killed in the crash. The most famous survivor, his name was Eugene, I don't know if I'm saying this, Hasinfus, and subsequently was was subsequently captured by the Sandinista forces, led to the unraveling of a complex web now known as the Iran-Contra affair. We go back to document 6. I was just talking about President Ronald Reagan and his commitment to the Iran-Contra hearings in the Iran-Contra scandal that he was just in. Okay, Hassan Fuss was a former Marine who had flown supply missions for Air America. Hassan Fuss was sent to El Salvador to join the Contra resupply operation headed by General Richard Secord for a promised salary of $3,000 a month, a good deal more than he was making as a part-time construction worker in Wisconsin. His job was to kick the loads out of cargo out the doors of a plane as it flew over Contra-controlled areas inside Nicaragua. So now that we learned so we have more information that we found out that one person was sent to El Salvador to join the Contra resupply operation that was led by General Richard Secord for a promised salary of $3,000 a month. By doing so, we actually can go back to document 6, where Ronald Reagan was actually in the affair of the Iran-Contra scandal. So by putting 2 and 2 together, we can figure out that hold on, I'm trying to look for the word. Now we can find out that Ronald Reagan knew that this was happening.
Oh yeah.
Because this happened in October 1986.
Well after he had passed that law. The courts had passed that law.
Right.
I'm sure he wasn't happy about it, but obviously did not stop him. But further going off of what you just said about them taking drugs out of a plane, that was the U.S., just to really clear this, that is the U.S., a former Marine who was kicking drugs out of a cargo plane above Contra-controlled areas inside of Nicaragua. They were pumping and just like randomly distributing by dropping these drugs on a country who was struggling so that they can have more control and cause a drug epidemic, such as they did for the United States. When there are times like this, it creates a market where the governments are profiting because there's supply and demand, and with things as harsh as drugs, like crack, it's highly addictive and will cause people to, become addicted. And when they're addicted, they're going to keep buying and keep trying to source it. And so if governments are able to just pump their countries full of drugs, they can profit off of it, which is what the United States did, and I think is still doing. Not going to lie. They're also guilty of funding and experimenting on citizens with MK Ultra. That's some other stuff, though. But yeah, no. CIA and U.S. military, highly corrupt, highly guilty, and they will likely never be prosecuted for this stuff, which is absurd. But
right.
Yeah. You got anything else to add?
No, I think that's it. I think that's what I got so far.